earth-shattering storm surge, but it was a relatively decent storm surge we had with Beryl in the upper part of the bay. And so we didn't have structures flooded and all that type of stuff, but the water got the seawater got pretty high in the bay. And when we were down measuring at Sargent, we found about 8.3 feet above ground level on the very far east end of Sargent and about a 10-foot mark with wave action. And so, Beryl produced a relatively decent storm surge up here on the upper Texas coast. And we've surveyed all that from High Island all the way down to Matagorda. Interestingly enough, what we found on the storm surge was kind of these peaks and valleys. So like Matagorda, we had roughly some fairly high numbers there. Not surprising, that was roughly the eastern eye wall. But similar values, we had 6 feet or so above ground level over on Bolivar, the middle portion of Bolivar, and also kind of on the west end of Galveston Island, right where the seawall ended down towards Jamaica Beach. And so there was these interesting peaks and valleys with this. Some of that could be because of how we're tying it back to mean high water. There's obviously some subjectiveness to what is mean high water when you're out there surveying. But when you look at the datum, when we take it on NAV D88 datum, the marks are a little bit more consistent. And so interestingly enough, another thing I'll add is we noticed about 1 foot to 1.5 foot higher on the storm surge on the Gulf facing side of, for example, Blue Water Highway and the 3005 that goes down in the west end, based compared to what we saw on the backside or the north side of those roadways. And so it seems like the surge was able to kind of pile up against those structures and then just kind of seep over. We noticed a lot of it got over the roads, but it seems like it took a lot of the energy away. And we didn't get the same readings on the backside, for example, of Galveston as we saw on the front side. And these are still water marks. So there's not wave. We look for still water marks, and there wasn't wave included in this. And so it appears that some of those structures, very important for storm surge forecasting and everything, but some of those structures helped pull back and reduce that energy of the surge as it came inland.
Did that all?
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just got a follow-up question on that. Could it also be the fact that there wasn't a fairly long period of a run-up of the wave action, increase the tides in the bayside before the landfall that might have contributed to that?
Yeah, that's certainly possible too. I mean, this was a relatively quick hit. And so I don't think we had a push, obviously, for that long. We're talking hours instead of days. I mean, we probably had higher levels. We probably had some higher water with Alberto back in June, possibly on some of the backside of the island because the water could get in there and help these tide cycles. But you're right. I just don't think the push was very long, away from the beachfront.
Jeff, with monitoring these rain gauges, getting data from bridges, is all this coordinated into like one computer model or system, or are these different systems that you kind of have to look at multiple platforms?
So all of our gauge data is publicly available on harriscountyfws.org. And so anybody can go out there and look at that. That gives you the rainfall and the water level information. And then we are running a forecasting model for our creeks and bayous. This isn't publicly available. We started doing this a couple years ago. We'd like to see a little bit better accuracy. The biggest challenge that we have here is the rainfall rates and how fast our channels respond. And so the model itself can run about once an hour, but in the span of an hour, we could see a creek or a bayou here rise 4, 5, 6 feet. And so we're kind of always playing catch up with this. And we just looked at some of the accuracy we had with Beryl, and we were plus or minus 2.5 feet. That doesn't sound too bad, but when you're dealing with Harris County and how flat we are, 2 and 2.5 feet makes a big difference in potentially flooding no homes or thousands of homes. And so we'd like to tighten up the accuracy. The biggest issue we have is the QPF, or the rainfall forecast. We're using the HER, we're using a moving average HER, we're also using the national blend of models. The HER is very high, it's very aggressive a lot of times with the rainfall it produces, and so it lights up a lot of our channels. The moving average kind of pulls that back a little bit. What was interesting with Beryl, it was the national blend that was actually doing the best, of course, because it was widespread. But it was interesting that we had some challenge. We still have the challenges with the QPF, and then until we can, get that to a place, we're going to have challenges with these fast responding streams. It's not as big of an issue on a big river because you have time, right? You potentially have days in Fort Bend County when it rains well north of you to get that all in there, but we don't have the luxury of time when it's raining 2 or 3, 4 or 5 inches in an hour on a small watershed. It's almost instantaneous runoff. I mean, we've actually talked about this even when Bill was MIC down here in Houston. Is this just better served as a flash flood warning? Is it just more the flash flood aspect of it, and on some of our creeks and bayous here because they're so small? So that's what we're working on. It's a lot of effort, coordinated effort with the River Forecast Center up in Fort Worth and our local weather service office here in League City.
Interesting stuff. I wonder if there's maybe capture the very short range QPF aspect of using some modeling based off of radar for a 1 hour QPF forecast on trends on the radar that might be useful.
Yeah, we're looking at that with, so we're working with NSSL on creating a rainfall GPE. So that's what has hit the ground. And then they want to take that and expand it into a 1 hour QPF product. And so we're working with them. Things don't move very fast in that realm. And so we've been working on this for a while. But I think that shows some promise. The HREF also shows some promise, but it can run hot also. So we are looking to incorporate some of the HREF SPC guidance into our rainfall and see if there's some issues there with how it's produced or something. This gets into all kinds of technical stuff with pulling data and all that. But the HREF is at least available at this point. Hopefully NSSL will be able to come up with that 1 hour moving forward QPF product, which that potentially could really help.
Yeah, so that leads to the question that the overarching thing I see for the whole thing on Beryl. How can you communicate? You've got such a large number of possible floodplains within the bayou system. How can we communicate that better to the citizenry than we are doing now? Because apparently we understand it because we're in the business, but I can tell you from talking to friends who are pretty savvy people live here a long while, they're clueless.
Yeah.
How do you deal with this?
Yeah, when you look at Beryl as a whole, I think there's just so much being thrown, between the three aspects that we deal with tropical systems, right? The rainfall, the storm surge, and the wind. And we knew on Sunday, Beryl, this was a wind. This was going to be wind, and so we really focused our messaging on the wind. I don't think people got it. I don't think people heard it. I think people completely were caught by surprise. There's still people today that are telling me I didn't expect it to be this bad. This can't be a Category 1. Really, we had a tropical storm in Harris County. We gusted up to 75, 85 miles an hour. We deal with flooding around here all the time. It's not just a tropical system. We deal with flooding all the time, and I don't really have a good answer on how to get these specific messages down. I think the way we have been doing it in the past with warnings coming from the Weather Service is maybe a little bit out of date at this point. A lot of people just want a text to their cell phone telling them, hey, it's flooding. Or if they're driving, hey, there's water on the road ahead. And I think there's mechanisms out there. The biggest problem we all have is accuracy. How accurate do we need to be to feel comfortable putting any sort of public messaging out, and how timely? Because if what we saw with Beryl, people kind of started hearing, oh boy, this is going to be bad on Sunday, and it takes time for people to think and respond to what does this mean for me? What do I need to do? And when we're raining 4 or 5 inches an hour, that time frame is extremely short. And so our messaging potentially is changing from the bayou's half full to your house is going to flood in the course of an hour. And how does that message get from what we're doing and talking about to that person, to that citizen, and then for them to take action and to realize, yes, we're talking to you, we're talking about you in your house, then you're potentially going to get water. And so I think just some of the challenges we face here is how quickly things go sideways with the rainfall rates we deal with. And the communication challenge is big. You know, the quickest and fastest now is probably hitting cell phones, and you know, when it's real bad, that's what we do. You know, we hit the cell phones with the WIA and the you know, flash flood emergencies and stuff like that. That's when it's really dire. Talking about how we did that with the derecho, you know, the Weather Service let the tornado warning just kind of go with the entire derecho. So we'd be hitting the phones. Yes, we can hit the phones on the high end severe thunderstorm warnings, but the tornado warning had a bigger impact. And when you talk to people, that's what made the difference for a lot of people is they got that warning on their phone. They said, oh, it just looked really bad. And they took action when we had the derecho back in May. And so it's interestingly how it's different. You know, it's sometimes like in the derecho, it was very serious. It was very short term. It came in, it hit hard, and it was gone. And then you have something like Beryl, where people just seem completely out of touch with the reality of what was coming. And I don't know. I don't know where we missed it on Beryl. Maybe it was on that Wednesday when it's Northeast Mexico and people left for the 4th of July and tuned it out and turned the TV back on or whatever on Sunday. And we're like, oh my goodness, maybe it's that. I don't know. But what's interesting also is we do all of these hurricane talks. We spend so much time talking about preparation. I mean, all of us do it, right? We do all these specials. We do everything. Be ready June 1st. And it just doesn't seem like most people really take heed to that. And they also don't take, what I've noticed is they really don't take heed to pay attention for track changes. You know, this isn't set in stone. There's uncertainty. And they see something or a cone or whatever, and they take it for concrete, and this is where it's going to go. And I think Beryl's a classic example here of you know, all of those things just kind of came together and have produced what we had here.
Yeah, I thought that the TV stations, I watched all of them at one point or another leading up to this. I thought they were doing a great job of pointing out that even the Hurricane Center was auguring in on the fact that it might track further east than what they've got now, that they're responding to changes in the model and all that stuff. Another problem that really, I thought the cell phone, internet cell phone interplay was the way to get this thing. When my power went out, so did my cell phone. Towers didn't work. I could almost get a text out, maybe 1 out of 3 over to my son who had power and internet. Wow. And I got the impression that was the case citywide with the powers going down. It's going down to the cell towers. Their backup power source cannot support full 5G service. And it really does. And everybody's trying to use it and it dumps.
Yeah, I think the selling of cell after Ike, that it's all been fixed and remedied. I knew we were gonna have issues because when I was in Laura, I went over after Laura and Ian and Michael, cell service was horrible. And I mean, you take damage to the towers, the power is an issue, you get into these cascading effects with power, with generators and refueling of generators and generators that don't work and people who don't maintain them and all that stuff. We saw the same thing with the winter storm. And so you get into these cascading impacts. And I don't think cell is not going to be a good communication mechanism during any big disaster. It's just until we can get something different or harden these sites better, whatever they tell you, it's just going to have challenges.
Wow. I think then it goes back to the original way we think we can improve the thing is you really have to get people more aware before there's nothing but blue skies out there of what can happen to them and what they're going to need to do when the storms hit.
Yeah, and you know, like I said, I mean, all of us go do talks, right? We all go do hurricane talks until we're blue in the face in May and June. I mean, I don't even know how many, and you're talking to like 15 people sometimes, or 20 people, or 30 people, and these are the people that probably already know, right? They're the ones that are interested enough to show up at a hurricane talk. Yeah. They probably already have a plan. They probably already have a kit. They probably already know what to do. How do you reach the other millions of people that this isn't on their radar at all? And you know, this is something that we've talked about. Is it the hurricane specials on the TV? Do people tune into them? You know, what is it? You know, we used to do the GRB thing here. We're talking, we'd reach 5,000 people, but that's still a pinprick compared to our population. And you remember how big of a lift that was for all of us to do that big thing. And so there's got to be something out there somewhere that we can do, that we can get more information out there that is where people are at. Is it sporting events or something like that, where we can just have better communications out there.
Yeah, I have USAA for insurance. They're one of our sponsors, and they actually one of the things they do that I think is useful. They'll prior to the season, they'll send out a message with links to things you need to be aware of when there's a hurricane approaching. So if all insurance companies are doing that, that's one other mechanism that gets it down. This is your home, and guess what? Your insurance keeps going up because the damages keep going up. Things you can do to mitigate that kind of thinking. But you're right. I think 1 out of 10 people pay attention to that, and the rest move on to the next problem.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff and Bill, a question for both of you guys. This concept that often the long-term impacts in the days and weeks after the storm are what really people find more challenging than the storm itself. And that surprises, I think, so many people. They're just focused on looking at wind speeds, maybe a flood level, and saying, I think I can endure this, but they're not thinking about 6 days without power or what this means. Have y'all noticed, just professionally and personally, as you're interacting with people, some people realizing like, okay, I need to think about these long-term impacts after the storm?
I think it's hard for people to wrap their head around what those impacts are going to be, because they're different for different people, right? So if you're on the coast, I mean, the coast is a mess. It's not destroyed, but it's a mess down there. There's stuff everywhere. There's portions of buildings that have been torn up. And so, that impact is different from, say, Montgomery County, where you have trees and power lines down. And I kind of said the same thing after for the metro area. The worst thing we had to do was turn the power back on. And this is the same thing with Beryl. Once the power comes back on, everything pretty much goes back to normal. What we need people to understand is when we take a category 4 hit, power is the least of our problems. I mean, because there's not going to be a whole lot to turn power back on to. And I just don't think people can really wrap their head around what that means. It's very difficult. Like we had with Harvey, it's hard to understand what 30 and 40 inches of rain means. You hear it, but what does that mean? Like, how does that impact you? Does that mean my house is going to flood? Does that mean it's going to be rooftop flooding? Does that mean the reservoirs are going to be full? I didn't even know there was reservoirs out there. I mean, it gets into all of these questions, and it's the same thing with 140 mile an hour winds or 25-foot storm surge. I mean, it's just very difficult for to be honest with you, I think even for some of our not elected officials, but emergency managers, to really fully grasp the devastation that's going to come from a big hurricane hit, a Laura or a Michael or an Ian into the upper Texas coast, is just going to be it's going to bring us to our knees. And power is not the problem then. It is, what do you do with 1 million homes that have damaged roofs? Where do you put that type of population? Where do you shelter that type of population? Basic services are going to be gone. I mean, we're talking about trying to keep a wastewater treatment plant up with a generator. Again, that's kind of the least of our problems, and I don't think we have a good answer to that when that day comes.
No, you can use recent storms to try to educate the people like Ian. It's a fairly populated place, very flat coastal plain, so large penetration going inland, a lot of older stock housing that is not built to any kind of a wind code. You should be able to learn something from that, but every location is different.
So I have a question to Tim down there in the valley is, since y'all been missed multiple times kind of in the cone and then it keeps creeping north, what do you think your folks are going to feel down there when it actually happens?
I had somebody ask the question yesterday, why, storms just don't come here, do they? Because, we've had a couple of near misses, like you said, and you're right. And I South Padre Island prepared somewhat for Beryl and almost no impact. When you go back to Hannah, impact was there, but minimal. Dolly, there was impact, but minimal. I think people listen, but I don't know that we'll be ready. I think they're going to say they always miss us. One way or another, they miss us. The big stuff always goes somewhere else. It's kind of like, the Indian burial grounds in Tampa or whatever it is. The latest thing now is there's the aliens have dropped something in the Gulf of Mexico that steers it around us, and there's actually belief in that, which blows my mind. But that's something that comes out of Mexico. So I don't think. I think we'll be somewhat ready, but not like we should be. And you're talking about how you reach the masses. Our good friend Barry at the Weather Service down here. One of the places he goes is he does faith-based messaging. Get into the churches. You got thousands of people gathering every week. How do you get in there and message them? Because if you hear it in church, you might actually listen to it, right? That's one, even if it's not coming from the priest or the pastor or, the minister, they might believe the message if they hear it from the pulpit on a Sunday morning at the end of the service. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's something that's being done anywhere else, but it's not a bad way to get the message out.
Yeah, you're right. We did do it some here. I just don't know if we reach, some of it is just, you just have a certain number of staff that can go out and do this stuff. If you look at the Weather Service, they have their staff. We have a little bit of our staff, county staff, but, we're probably talking in our entire region, 40 or 50 people who will go out and do these talks. And like I said, it gets so draining because it's 2 or 3 a day as you get into May and June. And you're sometimes you're doing these talks and it's 15 people. And there's just got to be a bigger bang for our buck somewhere that we can figure out how to do this.
Yeah. It's the middle of severe weather season. You go and spring flood season. So it's like you don't want to put all your resources out on the road doing talks to 15 people when you have a potential flood event going on.
Right. And this severe weather season really got us, starting in late April and going through May. We had the flooding and then we had the derecho, which was right during our big preparation lift time here, our big talk time and leading up to hurricane season time. And I mean, I still have people wanting talks in August. And it's just like, guys, this is why we do this in April and May and June, because you have Beryl, the week of the 4th of July, which was uncommon. I get it. But, planning stuff in August for preparation is just, I kind of shake my head about it, but.
South Florida was that way. I had more requests. I just said no because it's hurricanes.
Right.
I was down there, but that's when they wanted to do it all because it's the real hurricane season in their mind. Then we have a July hurricane.
Bill, why don't you give us a tropical update where we are now? Let's take a quick break and tell us where we stand today. I like seeing that box that says nothing expected for the next 7 days. I like seeing that.
Well, I got something similar to that, but I got some. Our friend Michael Lowry gave me some ideas, so I got to get it through here first. But we get back up here. We'll start there. We'll start where there is some action out in the Eastern Pacific. A lot of convection south of 10 degrees north. It's not really expected to do anything. They have a little bit of an invest on this, and it does look like coherent system, but guess what? It's cold water right here. That's where it's headed, and an increase in wind shear. So I don't think we'll see anything out of that. And let's see if they've changed anything. No, yep, still just a 30% chance. And that's really just today as it gets into the more adverse conditions. Nothing's going to happen there. Over in our basin, some convection off of Africa, kind of like in the monsoon trough there. Waves are suppressed way south, little wave here. It's getting ready to hit a bunch of shear. And Jeff was talking about the rainy period getting ready to start. It's a cold front coming down. It'll get stuck somewhere in Texas, and we'll be in that weakness between the subtropical high to the east and the heat dome over the west. And that'll usually give us rainier weather than normal, which the mosquitoes will love. Why are we not seeing a whole lot going on off the Atlantic? Is this big surge of dust. It's the leading edge of it is now reaching into the Caribbean, and more is spewing off of Africa as we speak, and it's indicative of a strong, dry subtropical high surge of easterlies coming off of Africa, and that's not conducive for tropical development. Michael Lowry, our speaker last week, posted this the other day. This particular dust surge, this is the normals in the gray shade there, and the orange line is this specific normal, and the normal range in there. It's spiking into a much stronger surge than we've seen on average and in recent years going forward. So it's not a surprise there. However, he put cold water on my hopes this year. I said, cooler water, all these aerosols. Well, these are the anomalies for the last week, and they're basically in the record territory, record warmest through the Caribbean and off into the main development region. And it's been warming up after a cool down in this area over the last several days also. So we're returning to this superheated tropical Atlantic, which is the driver for the big forecast for the season ahead. And everybody tries to compare seasons, and the last really busy season that they compare it to is 2005. And here's where the same time period the ocean was at that time. Yes, it was warm, but compared to what we're at now, not really. I gotta move this down here. There we go. And with that, it's not as sexy a picture as Michael Lowry's, but it is basically quiet. Back to you, Tim.
That's the last slide. That's the best slide. I'm glad you showed us that one. Yeah, and everybody's talking about it. Don't be lulled to sleep right now, because this is typical for this time of year, but it will change. I'm just surprised at how quiet the Pacific has been as well. I say surprised in this kind of year. That's not unusual, but just to see really nothing in the Pacific either thus far.
It's kind of unusual since it's still the waters where we see formation in the Eastern Pacific are actually warmer than normal. We're not in a La Nina yet, which is a shutdown pattern for the Eastern Pacific. So the atmosphere has been the driver. We probably had sufficient wind shear with the trophiness, it's tut-like trophiness extending back there.
So quiet for the day. Well, we appreciate that very much. Let's take a minute and thank our sponsors who make the show possible each and every week. USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, Weather Boy, the Weather Company, and Weather Call. These are all the folks who make NTWC Plus, the National Tropical Weather Conference, live on South Padre Island in April, a possibility. We appreciate all each of them do to make it so we can do this show and get this information out there. We are getting a lot of good questions. So after you do your GeoTruck update, we've got some questions from online that I want to ask. But Hal, talk about GeoTruck. What are you up to this week?
Tim, we have so much going on now with GeoTrack. We're covering these stories about extreme weather and natural disasters not covered by the mainstream media. Check out our latest podcast with Dr. Brett Webb, engineering professor at University of South Alabama. It's all about engineering perspectives for coastal resiliency. And we even get into other things like public health. And one of the things he mentioned was this danger of getting into floodwater. He mentioned in Hurricane Ian, all the fatalities from pathogens in the water. A lot of times people see the hurricane has passed. They think the danger has passed. And getting in that floodwater, also things like carbon monoxide poisoning, these other things, these indirect impacts are often as much or even more as the direct impacts from these hurricanes. So check that out wherever you listen to podcasts. That's GeoTrek podcast number 99 with Dr. Brett Webb. It just aired yesterday. And also GeoTrek, we're on the ground during hurricanes and extreme weather. We provided a lot of coverage during Beryl. A lot of that was picked up by network TV and all different kinds of media platforms. But we also did an informal wind assessment of Beryl's impacts in the region and what the winds were. This is not an official report. Keep your eyes out for the National Hurricane Center official report coming out, as well as anything from the National Weather Service. This was just an informal assessment. But what we really saw that was very sobering, generally Houston, Galveston corridor, Galveston Bay communities, Bolivar Peninsula, although virtually everyone I talked to thinks we had hurricane force winds sustained. Sustained winds, we think, were generally in the mid 50s to low 60s sustained. We did have hurricane force gusts, but something mentioned in the report is when we classify hurricanes, we're doing that based on a sustained wind. So if we were to take that wind field over Galveston and Harris counties, move that out into the Gulf of Mexico, that would not be classified as a hurricane. That would be a tropical storm with some hurricane force gusts. So it's sobering stuff to think about when Jeff mentioned thinking about these higher end hurricanes that hit in our neighborhood, like Laura and these other storms. If you actually had, say, an upper level Cat 2, sustained winds of 110 coming in, that could be as high as twice as strong winds, which would be 4 times the force of what we saw in Beryl. We know if you double the winds, you quadruple the force. it's just important to have a frame of reference. And that's what we're trying to do with GeoTrek, just to help people know what that actually was. Again, for most of Galveston and Harris County, those were sustained tropical storm force winds with hurricane gusts. It was not sustained hurricane force winds, which hopefully will help people calibrate their idea and their frame of reference. If a hurricane's actually coming, we never want to hear people say it's only a Cat 1. Only a Cat 1 can be extremely destructive. That's everything we have right now going on with GeoTrek. That's
great stuff, and I really appreciate your insight. I love listening to the programs because you ask good questions of the people you're talking to, and that really makes the show good. You really get people to give you good answers. So thank you for that. We appreciate that update. And I think the words that we've said for so long we need to ban from our vocabulary. It's the phrase just a Category 1, because a hurricane's a hurricane. And people, I think, miss that message. They just don't get that a hurricane, because they saw Beryl come out. Oh, it's a Category 5. Oh, now it's only Category 1. It's just a Category 1. How bad can it be? Well, clearly it can be and will be, and it's going to cause problems. So just should be removed from meteorologist vocabulary when you talk about hurricanes, plain and simple, I think.
Tim, I had so many people respond and say, are you kidding me? That was not even sustained hurricane force winds here. If a Cat 1 does come, we're out of here. Just a lot of people started to have a lot more respect, and I think a reverence or almost fear of what a Cat 1, 2, or 3 would be. They thought, okay, if those were sustained winds in the 50s and 60s, I'm not staying for a Cat 1. It was good to hear that.
And I think, I hope we don't see the Katrina Rita whiplash that we saw a few years ago. And then, Jeff, you can address that in a minute if you want to, because I think we could, because people are now saying, I'm going to go regardless. And now you're going to have a gazillion people on I-45 trying to get to Dallas, and they're just not going to get there. So let's come back to that. But I'll ask a couple of questions that have come in from online, and I'll ask and partially answer as well. Dave wants to know, why shouldn't organizations, like where you are, Jeff, and Hal, and all of us, partner with the local broadcast mess to get the word out about these messages, these programs that we're doing, that you're doing, to get people to show up. And I think, like from my perspective as a local broadcast Met, I think we would have no problem saying, hey, Jeff's going to be here Tuesday at 7 p.m. Go out and be there. My experience is a lot of those are Rotary meetings, and Rotary, or Kiwanis or whoever, but they're not ready for 300 people to show up. And I think if Jeff's doing it, I'll promote it. If the other affiliate down the street's doing it, I probably won't promote it. Jeff, you can address that if you like.
Yeah, I think you bring up some logistical challenges with it's a good idea, and I think the potentially the better way is, Bill, I think you might remember this. We did this during COVID when we couldn't all get together. We actually filmed a special with all of the TV stations and all the emergency managers at Transtar, which is kind of our emergency hub here. And then they all kind of broadcast this 30-minute or 1-hour special out. And I think potentially that's a better way to do this. But, you're absolutely right. If you send out, we're going to be at the Garden Club that expects 20 people and you get 400, that's not going to work out well. But I think there's definitely ways to do this. Mailers, maybe also, people still get mail, I guess. Sending stuff with their mail with I know Centerpoint used to do this with the gas bills. At the start of hurricane season, they'd send a little piece of information about what to do in a hurricane and stuff like that. But there's ways to do it. The other thing we get into is funding. And nobody really wants to talk about the funding aspect, but when you go to these things and pass out materials or whatever, it also puts a strain on governmental funding, and I know all the TV stations, I think, still do the hurricane tracking charts, but even that's kind of it's not as prominent as it used to be. I don't know how many people actually track with their pens and pencils anymore versus, the electronic ways now. And so, there's all kinds of opportunities and things out there, but somebody's got to be a champion of it, somebody's got to be a leader of it, and somebody's got to be the funder of it.
Well, all good points. And we stopped printing the tracking maps right before the pandemic. We used to print them with a local fast food restaurant, and they'd pass them out there. They were free. I think while people have stopped putting their pin in the wall or using their Sharpie to do it. I think the rest of the story with that is all the information that's in there. They may have stopped tracking, but they still need the information. If we can get that information one way or another into their hands, whether it's in the form of a tracking map or a brochure or something, put coupons in it, they'll take it, and that's why people took ours, because there was a coupon for a free Whataburger on the bottom, so I'll take that. And at least we got the information in their hands. And I don't know if that helps or not. Somebody's also asking, Catherine's asking, how do we communicate the risk of freshwater flooding in the inland communities that say, well, I'm 100 miles from the coast, I don't have to worry about a hurricane, San Antonio, Austin, or wherever, how do you communicate that risk?
Yeah, I mean, it's and even Alex, you can help with this because you're up in San Antonio, but you look at the inland impacts of this, and for example, Beryl, it wasn't just inland flooding; it was inland wind. I mean, we had wind damage and power outage all the way up into deep East Texas, almost to Shreveport. And I think people just tune it out. Even you got kind of get north of I-10 here in Southeast Texas, and no, this is a coastal issue. That's those folks down on the coast. That's their problem. And people just tune it out up here. And the inland freshwater flooding, like we saw, what was it, Hurricane Ida back in a few years ago, that the big flood was in New York City. 2 or 3 days later when the remnants came up through the Northeast. And so it's not just inland locally, it's inland across the nation, potentially up in the Great Lakes of the Northeast. As these things recurve and hook up with frontal systems and stuff like that, you get these incredible rains. And, how do you get the attention? It's the same thing we face down here with the imminent impacts. How do you get the attention of somebody in Oklahoma or Missouri or something like that, where now it's the remnant, right? It's the remnant. I mean, at least it still has a name. Names seem to bring a little more attention to things, I've noticed. But it's no different trying to get inland folks to understand as it is coastal folks to understand the hazards they're facing. And I think a lot of times that inland, and Bill, we've talked about this, I don't know how many times, that inland flood threat, regardless if it's a tropical system or not, just is people just don't take water seriously, and get into a lot of problems with it.
Yeah, with Beryl, there was some fairly significant flooding in Nova Scotia. And my colleague up in Halifax had attributed it to the remnants of Beryl, the injection of tropical moisture into a decent little ET wave caused flooding that far out. They were aware of it, whether the citizens were or not, I don't know. But yeah, the freshwater flooding has always been. I got a lot of people. Speaking of Harvey, one of the other things that I wanted to get your opinion on is among the people that still pay attention to me on social media. I was surprised at the number of people that asked me, "Is this going to be another Harvey?" And you can sense the anxiety level in there. Are you seeing still a lot of post-Harvey anxiety in your realm, Jeff?
I think we always will face that, probably for at least a decade, maybe longer. I think that was such a traumatic experience for a lot of people. And for the first few storms after Harvey, what was it, Nicholas, Imelda, some of them, the first thing out of our mouth was, this isn't Harvey. And I think we had to say it with Beryl a couple times. I think there was that period of time there where Beryl slowed a little bit as it came inland, and that's maybe where that narrative got going. We even, as Bill, we do tropical calls with the Weather Service 3 or 4 times a day when we're facing this. And even we had emergency managers asking, is this Harvey? Is this going to slow? Is this going to stall? And I think it's almost ingrained into everyone's mind here because it's happened so much in the last few times. You had Harvey, you had Imelda, and Nicholas potentially was going to be a big flood event for us also. And so I think flooding kind of goes to the forefront, which is why the wind kind of got lost, I think, to some degree in Beryl, but the wind was always the big story. And so I think we're always going to have to deal with that here, just because so many tropical systems cause us problems with flooding.
Yeah, I've built a database since the late 1800s of 20-inch or greater rains. All but 3 of them were tropical systems that slowly moved or stalled after coming inland. with the split between the two highs and the basic synoptic pattern of storms that make it to Texas coming out of the Caribbean is you've got a weakness between the highs anyway. So there's always that in the back of your mind is I hope the models are right when they have them moving. I have one more point I wanted to make because there's a lot about the wind, and I got shot down on an idea. I thought we focus so much on sustained wind. Building codes are based on the 3-second wind. Guess what? That's a gust. The damages that are occurring are based on the gust, not the sustained wind. Maybe when you get into the really extreme storms, it makes a difference. But and right on the immediate coast before the wind field breaks down into a gustiness rather than a more laminar flow over the water. Any thoughts on that?
It's funny you bring that up. When we were doing our storm surge survey, Jeff Evans, who's the MIC here in Houston, he was actually talking about maybe we should have gone with the hurricane warning based on the gust up into Harris County and possibly even in Montgomery County. I mean, 81 at Conroe. And would that be a more representative lead up to what people experienced? So on the meteorological side, it doesn't really work, right? So, there's the science side and there's the understanding of what people understand side. On the science side, obviously this wasn't a hurricane coming well inland, but we frequently gusted 75, 85, which is into hurricane. And should potentially we look at the warnings be more on the gust instead of the sustained, and would people understand that better? And I think that could have helped maybe in this scenario. I don't know if people still would have fully grasped the situation that was coming. But that's something to look at. In some hurricanes, they do the Iowa warning, the extreme wind warning, which is kind of that last ditch effort to this is going to be really bad here shortly. We weren't at that level with this. And on Monday morning, what I was kind of telling people was this is, the actions you need to take are just like it's a tornado warning. So take those actions and it's going to last about an hour and then it's going to be over. But I think there's possibly some stuff there. I think what hamstrings a lot of what can be done is the processes and procedures at the Weather Service and what they're able to do with some of their warning products and getting it out there. Because I'm sure there's going to be a number of folks that would push back on that recommendation of would you issue a hurricane warning based on gust? But from the public standpoint, I don't think there's a big difference there.
Guys, another thought with this, especially inland locations that have a lot of severe thunderstorms, a lot of that's communicated in terms of gusts as well. So that could give people a more of a frame of reference because we're using that for thunderstorms. But that said, I think we just all need to be on the same page. I think then we would need to change how the National Hurricane Center is classifying this over the Gulf. And the danger there would be people heard on the media with Beryl, we had wind gusts in the 80s. So what if the next hurricane has sustained winds in Galveston or the Houston-Galveston corridor in the 80s with gusts to the 120s? People might say, 85 mile an hour winds, that's just like Beryl. They would find it's extremely different than Beryl. So I think we would need to classify them consistently, both on land and over water as well.
Yeah, I had some discussions about the criteria for intensity and whatnot that confirms Jeff's thing about blowback. I didn't make much headway on that. Plus, there are some international agreements through the World Meteorological Organization about sustained versus gust that I think they should be revisited. I mean, some places use the 10-minute wind for sustained, which would even be lower than what we were if we were going that route. And there, wind's a tricky subject among the scientists.
Yeah.
So let's steer this another direction for a second, Jeff. I know that during Harvey, you worked a lot of hours, so much so that there was, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a GoFundMe to send you on vacation afterwards because you were on every TV station all day, every day. Does my memory serve me right about that?
Yes, sir.
So in terms of overtime hours, if you will, not specifically, but how did Beryl compare to Harvey? How much did you work in Beryl compared to how much you worked in Harvey?
It's interesting. I don't remember how much I actually worked in Harvey. It was just, Harvey's a blur. For Beryl's still going on. We're still doing recovery, we're still doing data collection, and so we're still like we've been working this weekend because a lot of the data collection is time sensitive, right? So high water marks and storm surge marks, you want to try to get out there and get that stuff collected, A, before people start cleaning up, and B, before you get some sort of weather that comes in that can wash the marks away. And so there's a lot of right in the aftermath, and then it transitions away. It transitions away from the meteorology and the forecasting and what the weather people do, and towards recovery. So your long-term recovery. But what's interesting about that is nowadays they need a lot of weather support. So we're operating pods right now. There's a lot of people doing not damage, but debris pickup out in the field, trucks and all that, and bad weather coming in for them is going to hamper some of those processes. And so what I would say is, when I first started doing this, so in 2003, and we had Rita, right? We had the near miss with Rita. And then, well, let's take Ike, for example. We had Ike in 2008. It seemed to be a shorter window, okay? And Ike was a big event for us. But it was kind of a month, and then it was over. And something for like Beryl, for example, I could see this going on for a while. I mean, we were still dealing with derecho stuff when Beryl hit. And we will still be dealing with Beryl stuff if something else hits us in August and September. And they just kind of all run together. And, Bill, you've been here long enough to know that's how our disasters go here. They kind of just all run together when they're back to back. If you look at the flooding in 15 and 16 we barely got on our feet from one before we had another flood happen. And unfortunately, that seems to be, the pattern we're in at the moment. Is it has been absolutely nonstop since mid-April here. We've had 2 federal declarations in 2 months, one in May for the derecho on flooding, and then of course Beryl here. And so, those of you who work on that side of the stuff, is federal declarations go on for a long time. You're talking years. I mean, we're still getting reimbursements and money coming in here from Harvey. And so this isn't stuff that kind of stops and goes on. But I would say, the good thing about Beryl is it hit, it moved through, it did what it's going to do. Harvey lingered, and that really, drug on people, that longevity of the weather part of it. Beryl was relatively brief. We're talking 12 hours. The thing hit and moved on, and you could already get out there and start doing stuff afternoon on Monday. So I think that's the big difference. Is this, hasn't lingered, and you can get into that recovery mode relatively quickly. One thing you did bring up about evacuation earlier, and I do want to talk about that, is I do have a feeling that if we are threatened, and I have a feeling we will be threatened again this in August and September, I think a lot of people are going to go. I think, and it's not necessarily the reason why they need to go. We do evacuation for coastal storm surge. But a lot of people, after the derecho and Beryl and the power outages, they are not going to do this. They're not going to stay here. They're going to leave. And it's, hopefully it all works out well if we have to do that trigger. But I'm definitely concerned for an evacuation that could potentially overwhelm our ability to safely get everybody out of here.
That kind of leads to the next question I was going to ask, is what keeps you awake at night as we head through this expected to be very busy season?
Boy, a big hurricane, and it can be rapidly intensifying, or it could just come in big. We can see it coming from the Caribbean or whatever, or it can pull a Laura or a whatever, or an Ian or a Michael and strengthen right up. I mean, the only fingers crossed is with those rapid intensification storms is the storm surge may not be horrible. I mean, it can still be bad, but it may not be awful if you're looking at kind of the big one. But that is going to test us like we've never been tested. I mean, there are going to be things that decisions that are going to have to be made that are going to be very hard decisions of how do you get people to where they need to be as quickly as you possibly can. There's just no way in a 48-hour, if for example, if Beryl would have spun up a little bit more, let's say it had 12 more hours and kept strengthening, there's no way we could have pulled the trigger on evacuation. I mean, it was the timeline was over. It would have been get off the West End, get off of Treasure Island, get off of Surfside, maybe get out of Seabrook and Kima, but that's about it. That's about all we could have been able to do. And I think that's every emergency manager's nightmare here is when you don't give them the time. And the funny thing is Beryl gave us the time. If you look at the track, we've been talking about Beryl for a week. I mean, this is one of those hurricanes coming through the Caribbean. It's not like you didn't see it coming, but the forecast was so uncertain in the Western Gulf of Mexico, it really only gave us 48 hours. And I talked to, again, Jeff Evans about this, like, what do we do? I mean, the emergency managers have a very valid complaint, if you will, or criticism or challenge here. Is like, guys, you gave me 48 hours for a hurricane we knew was out there 7 days ago. But we're just not that good when there's that uncertainty. And, it's not always going to be your Laura tracks where it's rounding the ridge and it's a good track and it's not shifting. You're going to have things like Beryl, as Bill talked about, approaching the break in the ridge and all that. And how hard does that turn to the right? But imagine if this thing would have ramped up to a Cat 3 or 4 and come in here. And everything else we were dealing with, the 4th of July weekend and all of that. I mean, so that's certainly what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, that would be my same answer when I was MIC. Is the one that we have at the time you need to call an evacuation. You have a storm that's a tropical storm or a Category 1, and you're not certain about A, the exact track, or B, the intensification factor, which back then was a really big problem because we had no skill at RI at the time. But the decision makers are going to be loath to make a decision on a storm that isn't already strong. It's hard to convince them that your forecast is right for a big intensification. And for our big cities, that's what we need. You just can't get around that fact. Yeah, you can get the people off the barrier islands in Brazoria and Matagorda County in less than 12 hours if you have to. It's just not that. You don't have the traffic management issue that you have up here.
I had an emergency manager at our conference in April come up to me after listening to some of the presentations, and he looked at me and says, "You guys just don't get it. You need to give us more warning. When are you going to do that? You don't get it." I was like, after listening to all the presentations that you guys all gave, you guys don't get it. It's like, gosh. We're coming to the top of the hour. We're coming up to 11 o'clock. So, Hal, final question or thought before we wrap?
Jeff, amazing perspectives. I mean, with these types of storms like Beryl, you're having a range of possibilities and you don't have certainty until it's too late. Like you said, if you're an emergency manager, you're in a tough position. The other alternative is you do this mandatory evacuation that might be unnecessary. So I think what you mentioned before, people anchoring on an early forecast, just reminding them to stay back in for changes and do our best to see as those range of possibilities kind of get more focused. That's the best I think we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. But what's funny is I think a lot of those statements, even sometimes with emergency managers, get lost. It's when we say we are not certain, and maybe we need to be more forceful with it. Maybe we need more blunt with it. Like, we do not know. This could come further north. Because my question, back down to Tim, down in the valley, this thing was aimed at on the 4th of July. Were y'all talking potential evacuations down there, clearing the island, or any of that type of stuff? Was that even being talked about?
There was discussion about when people were canceling reservations and not showing up. Their occupancy rate went from 100% down to about 30% because people were just hearing the news that it was in the bullseye, so we're not going. And then they had the shark attacks, and that kind of cleared things out really quickly once that happened. So it was a double-edged sword for them. They're just now getting back to normal after 10 days of the storm. But there was not a lot of discussion of evacuating, as people were saying. It's just final thoughts, questions?
Yeah, since 1992, I've been a big cheerleader for the Harris County Flood Control District. I think a lot of people don't realize what an asset that is, that most coastal major communities don't have anything like it. And then one of the best things the Harris County Flood Control District ever did was hire Jeff.
Well, thank you, Bill. Appreciate that.
Jeff, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with today? Something that you want people to think about as we head through the rest of the hurricane season?
We don't just say get your plan and get your kit ready. Just to say it. We really do mean it. Like, if Beryl has not taught us anything here in the metro area, it is please have a plan and at least have some degree of a kit. And now hopefully people take what they have learned from Beryl and the expectations here and apply that to their plan and to their kit. And when we have a storm in the Gulf, you have to check back for changes, as the forecast evolves.
Great stuff. This forecast can and will change. That's the phrase that we use over and over and over again, and it proves so true with that storm. So thank you, Jeff. Great insight today. Thanks for spending time with us. We really appreciate it. Good to have you, buddy. That wraps up our program for today. We appreciate everybody for being with us. Alex, thank you back at headquarters for getting the job done. Alnita, Dr. Howe, Hurricane Howe, thank you for your wonderful insight as always. And Bill, great questions and the background that you bring to this program each and every week. We sincerely appreciate that as well. And of course, our sponsors, we appreciate them. USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Weather Company, Weather Boy, and Weather Call. All make NTWC Plus, the National Tropical Weather Conference, and everything we do at the Storm Science Network a possibility. So we appreciate all of them. And most importantly, we appreciate you at home or wherever you are watching us today for being part of NTWC Plus. That wraps it up for today. Take care. You all have a great week. Stay safe. Enjoy those 7 days where no tropical activity is expected. See you next time.
All right, really close. Good show.
Great stuff.